It's almost like raiding her diary. Paul Burrell said those words when a British broadcaster announced plans to air footage from Diana's private sessions with her voice coach. This was a man who had been arrested for allegedly stealing 342 items from her apartment. A man who had written his own memoir about the most intimate details of her life. A man who had sat across from every tabloid in England and talked about things Diana had told him in confidence, and even he called it a raid. That tells you something about what was kept behind those walls at Kensington Palace, about how much of Diana's actual interior life, the things she saved, the things she hid, the things she locked away in boxes that she labelled herself and placed in specific rooms for specific reasons, never made it into the version the world was given. The world got the photographs, the dresses, the charity work and the handshakes and the 25-foot train, and the balcony and the panorama interview and the crash in Paris. The world got the performance, which was extraordinary, but the private life, the one she lived in apartments 8 and 9 at Kensington Palace, behind doors that closed and windows that faced away from the cameras, that life was assembled from objects that told the true story, objects that the palace, the institution, and the people around her had every reason to want buried, lost, shredded, or quietly transferred somewhere they would never be found. Some of them were found, some of them are still missing, some of them were destroyed by the people who found them first. This is that story, the things Diana kept, what they meant, why the palace never wanted them found, and what happened to them after August 31st, 1997, when the apartment went quiet and the institution moved in. Everything in this script comes from documented sources. Paul Burrell's sworn testimony at the 2008 inquest and his memoir A Royal Duty. The Morton tapes, recorded in 1991 and 1992 and released publicly after Diana's death. The Settlin tapes, filmed by her voice coach in 1992 and 1993, seized by police in 2001 and not returned until 2004. Harry's account in Spare, the 2008 inquest testimony of Lady Sarah McCorquodale, the documented police record of what was found in Burrell's attic. Where the record is disputed or uncertain, I'll tell you. Nothing here is fabricated. But what is documented is extraordinary enough. Before we go further, if this channel has ever shown you a Diana you hadn't seen before, take 1 second and subscribe. This one goes places the cameras never reached. Begin with the most consequential objects in the apartment. Between 1991 and 1992, Diana sat alone in her private rooms at Kensington Palace and recorded herself answering questions about her marriage, her mental health, her husband, and the institution that had absorbed and nearly destroyed her. Her friend Dr. James Colthurst brought the questions from Andrew Morton in a briefcase in a bicycle basket. Diana clipped the microphone onto herself, took the questions, and talked. She sometimes interrupted herself with laughter, Colthurst said. She was not performing grief. She was telling the truth about her life, and sometimes the truth was funny, and she let it be funny on tape. The tapes were smuggled out of Kensington Palace, the same way they came in. Briefcase, bicycle basket. The most powerful document in the history of the House of Windsor, recorded in a private sitting room and cycled out of the palace gates. Diana kept copies, or kept something, because when the palace moved in after her death, and when Burrell was arrested in 2001, and when the trial began, there was significant institutional alarm about what the tapes contained and who had them. The Queen intervened personally to collapse the trial at the point where Burrell's full testimony about the items in his possession was about to become public record. The tapes Burrell had were eventually returned to the people they belonged to. The copies Diana kept, if she kept them, and the evidence suggests she did, are a different question. Some of them may be at Althorpe, in the Spencer family archives, hidden in the 90-room house where Diana grew up, accessible to no one outside the family. They have never been confirmed as found. They have never been confirmed as destroyed. They simply haven't been discussed. In 1992, Diana hired a voice coach named Peter Settlin. She was preparing to find her public voice, to move from the managed institutional voice of a princess to something that sounded like her. What followed, across months of sessions in Kensington Palace, was 20 videotapes of Diana talking about things she had never said anywhere for the record. She talked about the first kiss with Charles, her verdict, erg. She talked about going to the Queen sobbing, about Charles telling her he refused to be the only Prince of Wales who never had a mistress, about feeling like she was crucifying herself inside, because she didn't think she was good enough, about what the public wanted from her,
a fairy princess who touched them and made everything gold, and what the woman underneath the fairy princess was actually enduring. These tapes were private, filmed in her apartment, never meant for broadcast. When Diana died, they were at Setterland's home. When Burrell was raided by police in 2001, 6 of the Setterland tapes were among the items seized from his attic. The theft trial collapsed. The tapes were returned to Setterland in 2004. NBC aired portions of them that year. Channel 4 broadcast them in Britain in 2017, 20 years after Diana's death. The broadcast caused outrage. Diana's friends said it was a betrayal of her privacy. Rosa Monckton called it exactly that, a betrayal. Former royal spokesman Dickie Arbiter called it absolutely shameful. Burrell himself, the man who was arrested for taking her things, said it was almost like raiding her diary. The palace said nothing officially. William and Harry's office declined to comment. The tapes exist. They are in the public domain, and they contain things about Diana's interior life that she recorded privately in 1992 because she was trying to find her voice, not to broadcast, but to understand. The finding of her voice was for herself. The broadcasting of it was done by others after her death for reasons that had nothing to do with her intentions. This is the one that has never been fully resolved. Investigative authors Dylan Howard and former detective Colin McLaren, in their book Diana, Case Solved, claimed that Diana kept a box in her Kensington Palace apartment, which she labelled herself. She called it the Crown Jewels. Inside it, they claimed were 10 videotapes and audio cassettes she had recorded herself, separate from the Morton tapes and separate from the Setterland sessions. Recordings of a different kind, recordings that, according to their sources, contained what they described as a record of her knowledge of scandals that could finish Britain's monarchy. The box disappeared after August 31, 1997. It has never been found. It was not among the items recovered from Burrell's attic. It was not at Althorpe, according to the public record. That 2008 inquest, Lady Sarah McCorquodale, Diana's sister, was questioned about it. She denied having destroyed it. She said she gave the contents to Burrell for safekeeping. Burrell said the papers were taken to Althorpe by the Spencer family. Both accounts cannot be simultaneously correct. The coroner accepted the testimony. The contents of the box were not produced at the inquest. What was in it, beyond what Howard and McLaren's sources described, remains unknown. What is known is this: Diana kept a box. She labelled it herself with a name that told you she understood exactly what it contained. And the box is gone. Paul Burrell testified to this at the inquest and described it in his account of the private meeting he had with Queen Elizabeth in December 1997. The Queen told him, "I wrote many, many letters to her, Paul. Letters from the monarch. Private correspondence." Elizabeth trying, in her own language, black and white as Burrell described it, while Diana spoke in colour to reach across the glass between them and say something that mattered. Those letters were in Kensington Palace after Diana's death. Burrell said he was concerned about what was happening to Diana's historical documents in the days after the crash. He said Diana's mother, Frances Shand Kidd, spent several days at the apartment going through her belongings. He said she shredded dozens of documents. Burrell was concerned she was destroying historical letters from members of the royal family. How many of Elizabeth's letters survived is not known. Whether any of them were among the documents shredded by Frances Shand Kidd is not known. What is known is that a woman who had been estranged from her daughter for the final 4 months of Diana's life arrived at the apartment after the death and spent days going through the papers. Burrell testified to it under oath. Nobody contradicted the testimony. The actual physical recorder, the machine into which Diana spoke the most honest account of her own life ever put on record. It was in the apartment. It moved in and out through Colthurst's bicycle basket for months. What happened to it after Diana's death is not part of the documented record. It was a small thing, unremarkable to look at. The kind of object you could pack in a box and put on a shelf and never identify as historically significant unless you knew what it had recorded. It recorded the truth about a marriage. Into a domestic tape recorder in a palace sitting room, while the institution outside the walls maintained, for several more years, that the marriage was managing. Diana kept diaries. This is documented across multiple sources and across multiple periods of her life. She wrote. She processed things on paper. Whether those diaries survived intact, were partially destroyed, were removed by the Spencer family, or are held at Althorpe is something the public record does not confirm. What the public record does confirm is this: Francis Shandkid shredded documents. Burrell took items for safekeeping. The Spencer family went through the apartment. The palace went through the apartment. Multiple parties with multiple interests processed Diana's private papers in the weeks after her death. The diaries, if they survived any of that, have not been published. They have not been discussed publicly by the Spencer family. They are either at Althorpe, destroyed, or somewhere else entirely. This is documented in the most specific terms. In the claims made by Howard and McLaren about the Crown Jewels box, they stated that among the items kept under lock and key in Diana's apartment was a signet ring belonging to her former lover James Hewitt. Hewitt was a lifeguards officer. The relationship lasted from approximately 1986 to 1991. Diana admitted it on Panorama. She said yes, she had been in love with him. Hewitt subsequently sold his story and published a book. Diana called it a betrayal. The relationship was over before the book appeared, but the sense of having trusted someone who eventually sold her out stayed with her. She kept his ring, or, according to the sourced claim, she kept it. Whether it was still in the apartment at the time of her death, whether it was in the Crown Jewels box, and what happened to it afterward, the record does not fully confirm. But a woman who kept a signet ring from a relationship that ended in betrayal is a woman who did not stop feeling things simply because the institution preferred her to. This one is documented from a completely different direction. From the photographs Paul Burrell took inside the apartment in the days after Diana's death, photographs published in the Irish Sunday Mirror in 2017, which show the interior of apartments 8 and 9 at Kensington Palace as Diana left them. Among the collection of cuddly toys on the sofa in her bedroom was a frog, a small handmade frog, which Diana had made herself as a child. She had carried it with her. From the Spencer family homes, through the engagement, through the marriage, through the separation, through the years of living alone in the palace apartment. A frog she made as a child, sitting on the sofa in the bedroom of the most photographed woman on earth. She kept it because it was hers. From before all of it. From before the institution and the title, and the fairy tale and the performance. From when she was just a girl in a family that by her own account told her she was the thick one. She made a frog. She kept it for the rest of her life. It sat on her sofa. Also from Burrell's photographs of the apartment. The dressing room, the room where most women in her position would have had mirrors and fashion and the architecture of appearance, was covered in photographs of her sons. Not decoratively, covered. Completely. From what the photographs show, every available surface was given over to images of William and Harry at various ages. This was not a palace-approved display. This was not the official royal family portrait arrangement. This was a mother who had decided what her dressing room was for, who had looked at the space designed for the management of her image and decided to fill it with the faces of the people she loved most. The palace never commented on the dressing room. Nobody needed to. The photographs spoke for themselves. The room where she sat across from Martin Bashir, where she said 3 of us in this marriage and the world changed, where 23 million people watched a woman who had spent 14 years being managed finally refuse the management, on camera, with a composure that no amount of media training could have produced, because it came from somewhere the media trainers couldn't reach. That room was in her apartment, the palace's apartment, technically, but her room, her furniture, her choice of where to place the camera and how to arrange the chairs and whether to let the BBC in at all. She let them in. The palace found out 15 minutes before air. The drawing room still exists inside Kensington Palace. Other people live there now. But the room is the same room. The space where she said it is the space where she said it. This is not confirmed by a single source as found and catalogued, but it sits within the documented record of who Diana was. She wrote letters. She wrote to Nani Appa, Hasnat Khan's grandmother, for months, handwritten, personal, trying to build a relationship before they had met. She wrote to members of his family. She wrote, according to Burrell's testimony, to many people about many things. Whether she wrote letters to Khan that were never sent, that stayed in the apartment in a drawer, expressing things she had said to the recorder or to Burrell, but not directly to him, is not confirmed. But she was a woman who processed things on paper, who kept the frog, who kept the ring, who labelled a box of recordings Crown Jewels. She did not discard the private things. She kept them. What she kept about him specifically, the love of her life, the man she flew to Pakistan for twice, the man who told Paul Burrell he didn't want to be just Mr. Diana, is not fully known. Because the apartment was processed by multiple parties with multiple interests, And not all of those parties were interested in protecting Diana's privacy. In his memoir and in various interviews, Burrell described Diana's habit of recording her thoughts privately, not for Morton, not for Settlin, for herself. A way of processing the days, a way of saying the things out loud that couldn't go into a diary because she had reason to believe her diaries weren't safe. The royal family had surveillance capabilities inside the palace. Diana had been warned by a member of the royal family who wrote the name down for the coroner at the 2008 inquest, a name the coroner did not disclose publicly, that she should be discreet even in her own home because they were listening. She recorded herself anyway. Whether those private recordings survive, what they contained and where they are, the public record does not say. This one is confirmed and visible. In the photographs from the final months of Diana's life, the Angola landmine visits, the Christie's auction trip to New York, the photographs from that last summer, she was wearing an aquamarine ring on her right hand. She had bought it herself, at auction. Not a royal gift, not a family piece, not something chosen for her by a dresser or given to her by an institution. She found it, she wanted it, she bought it. After Diana's death, Harry wore it. He has spoken about it. It was one of the specific pieces he identified with her. At his wedding to Meghan, Meghan wore an aquamarine ring at the evening reception, a gesture widely understood as a tribute to Diana, using her own piece. The aquamarine ring made it to the boys that one arrived, documented by Burrell from both his memoir and his testimony. Mother Teresa gave Diana a rosary, a simple one. The kind of object a woman who had taken vows of poverty would give, not about the object, about what the object meant. Diana kept it. When she died in Paris, Burrell brought it there. He gave it to her driver, Colin Tebbott. Tebbott gave it to a nurse at the hospital and asked her to place it in Diana's hands. It was still there when Charles arrived, still there when her sisters came, still there when she was brought home. She was buried with it, a Protestant woman from Northamptonshire, buried with a Catholic rosary given to her by an Albanian nun in a convent in Rome, holding it in her hands in the ground at Althorpe. That item reached its destination. It got there. The right hands held it. Diana's mother arrived at the apartment after the death. She stayed for several days. She went through the papers. Paul Burrell watched, with increasing alarm, as she shredded documents. He was concerned. He said so under oath. He believed she was destroying historical letters, correspondence from members of the royal family that belonged in the record, that Diana would have wanted preserved. Francis Shand Kidd did not testify at the inquest about what specifically was shredded. The content of those documents, whatever they said, whoever wrote them, whatever they revealed, is gone. Diana had stopped speaking to her mother 4 months before she died. The last conversation had been one in which Francis called her daughter a name that Burrell repeated under oath in a courtroom. A name no daughter should hear from the woman who raised her. Francis arrived at the apartment after the death and shredded documents. What was in them is not known. That they were destroyed is documented. Not the official portraits, not the published ones, the personal photographs, the ones from ordinary days, the boys at Highgrove, the boys at theme parks, the boys on holiday, the boys doing the things boys do when nobody is photographing them for the newspaper. Diana was a photographer of her children. She had cameras. She took pictures of moments that the palace had no access to and no interest in publishing. Those photographs were in the apartment. Some of them went to William and Harry. Harry has described in Spare the experience of growing up with his mother's image everywhere, public, iconic, managed, and the specific grief of not having the private version, of wanting the ordinary photographs. The ones from the days when she was just mum. Whether all of those photographs reached the boys is something the public record cannot confirm. Diana worked with multiple therapists across the years of the marriage and afterward. She processed things verbally and on paper. Whether she wrote letters to her therapists, letters that stayed in the apartment, part of the private architecture of her healing, is not confirmed by a single documentary source. But Burrell described her as someone who wrote, who recorded, who kept, who understood that the private record was the true record and the public record was something else entirely. Whether those letters exist and where they are is not known. Burrell testified that Diana had called him urgently one day, had called out to him, and he'd run up the staircase and found her crumpled on the floor of her room, the telephone pressed to her ear, tears running down her face. She held the phone toward him. She said, "Listen, listen to what Mummy's saying." He heard it. He testified to what he heard under oath. The words Francis Shand Kidd said to her daughter that night ended their relationship permanently. Diana never called her mother again. Whether Diana recorded that call, whether the instinct that made her call Burrell in and make him witness it was the same instinct that made her keep records of everything important, is not confirmed. But the call happened, the words were said. And Diana, who kept the frog she made as a child, who labelled a box of recordings crown jewels, who wore a man's ring long after the relationship ended, Diana did not let important things dissolve without trace. This is in the documented record from a specific and significant direction. Diana made a handwritten document, sometimes described as a letter of wishes rather than a formal legal will, in which she expressed her wishes for her personal belongings. The document was not her official legal will. It was something she wrote herself, in her own hand, expressing what she wanted done with the things that mattered. Paul Burrell described it. The instruction was simple and total. She wanted the boys to have everything. That document existed. What happened to it after August 31st, 1997? Whether it was among the papers Francis Shandkid went through, whether it is at Althorpe, whether it is in the possession of William and Harry, is not publicly confirmed. What is confirmed is that the instruction it contained was not fully honoured. Harry wrote about that in spare, in his own name. In print, the everything did not all arrive. The final item, not an object, not something you can hold or catalogue or photograph. Diana recorded herself so that her voice would survive. That was the calculation behind the Morton tapes, behind sitting alone in an apartment with a recorder and answering questions about the worst years of her life into a machine that she trusted would outlast the management. She knew the institution would produce its own version. She knew the managed version would run in the press, and the courtiers would brief the journalists, and the machine would smooth and contain and absorb. She had watched it do that her whole adult life. So she recorded herself. She said, the public side was very different, obviously, from the private side. She said, little did they realize that the individual was crucifying herself inside because she didn't think she was good enough. She said it into a tape recorder in a private sitting room, while the institution outside the walls maintained that she was difficult, unstable, emotional, unwell. She said it so that after she was gone, or after the managed version had been given enough time to settle into history as truth, someone would be able to press play and hear the actual voice. Her voice survived. It is on record. It has been broadcast in America and in Britain and heard by millions of people who were not born when she was alive. The palace never wanted those tapes found. The trial was collapsed before the full inventory of what Burrell had could become public record. The Satellan tapes were seized by police and held for 3 years before being returned. The crown jewels box has never been found. The documents shredded by her mother are gone, but the voice survived. And the voice is the one item in this list that the institution, for all its management and all its resources and all its careful arrangement of what the world would and wouldn't be allowed to hear, the voice is the one item the institution never fully got to. Leave her in the sitting room. Sometime in 1991, she has the recorder in front of her. The microphone is clipped to her. James Colthurst has gone. The briefcase is gone. The palace is quiet. The boys are at school. She presses play. She starts to talk. Not for the world, not yet, for the record, for the version of events that would outlast the managed version, for the woman she actually was, as opposed to the woman the institution had spent 10 years performing on her behalf. She talks about the marriage, about the bracelet, about the phone call in the bathroom, about going to the Queen sobbing and being sent away with 2 sentences, about the bulimia which began the week after she got engaged, when Charles put his hand on her waist and said, "A bit chubby here, aren't we?" About the years of feeling like she was crucifying herself inside. She talks. She laughs sometimes. She takes the next question. Outside the windows, the photographers wait. The institution manages. The press secretary handles the calls. The palace machine runs on schedule, smoothly, without interruption. In the sitting room, a woman is pressing record. She always knew that was the real thing she was protecting. Not the title, not the apartment, not the jewels, the voice, the true account. The record that would survive when everything else had been managed and shredded and redistributed and allocated and lost. She pressed record, she talked. 20 years later, the world heard it and understood, for the first time, what had actually been kept in that apartment. Not items, a life. And the palace never found a way to lock it away completely. Thank you for staying with me through this one. Of all the stories this channel tells, the ones about what Diana kept, what she chose to save, what she chose to record, what she labelled crown jewels and hid under lock and key, are the ones that tell you who she actually was when no one was watching. She was someone who knew the managed version would run, and she built an archive against it. Some of it survived, some of it didn't, but enough survived. Enough that we can still press play. Enough that the voice is still here.